Good morning, everyone. My name is Alec Cloyd. I'm the Chief of the Travel Operations Division at the DTMO. Within my division is the Government Travel Charge Card Program, and I'll be presenting an update on the Travel Card Program as part of this year's GSA Forum. I first want to thank you all for your attendance at this particular session, but also thank you for the great work that you have done over the last year and continue to do on a day-to-day basis to support either your subordinate APCs or your travel card holders and all the other stakeholders within the program. And I also want to thank the travel card team here at the DTMO, who you'll be meeting here virtually, at least as part of this presentation. And speaking of the travel card team, so again, I'm Alec Cloyd, the chief of the Travel Operations Division. The other members of the team are, first of all, Ray Wall, who is the chief of our Travel Resources branch. So he oversees the travel card team, but also the training and development team here at the DTMO that does all the great work with regard to travel resources, to include those that support the travel card program. JP Miller is the travel card team lead. He oversees the day-to-day activities of the team members and works most directly with your CPMs. DeQuan Harrison is the Army and Air Force liaison, so he works most directly with the Army and Air Force CPM offices in that regard. But he's also the subject matter expert for the DTS CBA reconciliation module, so works to address any issues or concerns that get reported in that regard. He also develops and helps distribute the key metrics that we report to your CPMs on a monthly basis. Rick Lynn is the newest member of the team. He's the liaison to both the Navy and the U.S. Marine Corps. He also is our training and policy subject matter expert, so helps coordinate any changes to training, any changes to policy through your CPMs as we update, for example, the travel card regulations and other reference documents. Crystal Heath is the liaison to the roughly 30 or so defense agencies out there, so she keeps very busy with all those. She also manages and kind of oversees the CPM appointment letters across the organization, and then works to address any inquiries we might get into the mailbox you see there, and also updating any FAQs we have in our Knowledge Center on tracks. Speaking of inquiries, you'll see the email address there. I should let you know that email address will be changing in the not too distant future. So we'll make sure that you have the most up-to-date email address as well. But you also see the note there. So just like pretty much everything that goes on in a DoD organization, we ask that you use your, for lack of a better word, chain of command in terms of first trying to get your question or issue addressed at your next higher level APC or CPM. We're certainly happy to address any questions we get on that email, but it's important that you work through your local organization or your CPM as well, because in some cases some of the detailed processes that you do might be different from service to service. So that's why we ask you to go through those lower levels first. Okay, next I'd like to talk about just some of the program and policy updates we've had since last year's forum. Some of them remain kind of in progress, if you will, as you see there, but I wanted to make sure you're aware of those. So as you know, we implemented one-time passcode multi-factor authentication last year as well. Specific to email, though, with the help of the Navy, we were able to extend the timeline for entry of the OTP from 120 seconds out to 5 minutes. As you know, depending on your organization, firewalls and just access issues, sometimes those emails don't come in very quickly. So specific to email delivery of the OTP, the timeline for entering the OTP in order to access City Manager was extended out to 5 minutes. It does remain at 120 seconds for delivery via text message or voice calls. With the help of the Air Force, we're starting. We have been working for a while now, but we seem to be getting a little bit closer to implementing a pilot program for the virtual travel card. So the Air Force is hoping to get that off the ground in the not too distant future, and that will help us to do the same with other services as we move forward. We did implement within City Manager itself. We did recently implement a transfer transaction capability. Previous to that, if you had a transaction that needed to be transferred from one account to another, your CPMs, or in some cases some of your APCs, had to go through the help desk for that. But there's a capability to do that within City Manager itself now, so that makes that process more efficient for you. As you know, we've always had we've always had blocking transactions at certain MCCs that are not related to travel, or more directly, not at unauthorized locations. And while that helps us kind of weed out, if you will, unauthorized use, in some cases, merchants within those MCCs remain unauthorized, even though they're in an authorized MCC, if you will. So to help us in that regard, we've been working with Visa and Citi, and hopefully in the not too distant future, we'll add the capability to also block transactions at specific merchants. So even though, for example, they're in a restaurant MCC, but they're not really a restaurant, and you know what I'm talking about, probably they're adult entertainment establishments, for example, which are certainly unauthorized and off limits. We're not able to block those directly today because they're in a, for lack of a better word, good MCC, but we're looking to be able to enhance that capability by blocking them by the specific merchant level. One thing you should see here in the not too distant future is implementing a mobile wallet capability. So it's not a requirement, but in a similar way that you might use a mobile wallet, be it Google Pay or Apple Pay or Samsung Pay, when you're out and about using your personal credit card, we'll provide that same capability for mobile payments via either your government device or a personal device. So that'll give additional flexibility for some cardholders that might want to use that card in that way. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about some of the key metrics that we track and then report to your APCs, starting with IBA and CBA delinquencies. And this is rather than showing the whole year, which is kind of difficult to do on the eyes, if you will, from a presentation perspective, what we did is list the highest level and the lowest level throughout the year and indicate when that was. For IBA delinquencies, we're in pretty good shape. The threshold, if you will, for IBA delinquencies is set at 2%. So we've done very well, even as we've seen travel start to pick up over the last couple months. Or the last 6 months or so, we've been able to maintain those delinquencies at those low rates. And that's measured, the percentage you see there is the percentage of delinquent accounts measured against all the open accounts. And those numbers have been pretty good. But where we need your help is reducing those long-term delinquencies, especially in the IBA program. Anything over the 90 days, well, anything over roughly 60 days, then we lose our opportunity for rebates. But when we start to see those delinquencies drag out at 90%, 90 days plus, and then eventually on to 120 and 150, it just like anything else, the longer you let them drag out there, the harder it is to get those delinquent bills paid. And ultimately what it does is become a write-off and therefore a credit loss, and it reduces your the rebates that you receive. So, for example, in just the fourth quarter of FY22, because of those long-term delinquencies and related credit losses, we lost roughly $700,000 in rebates that we otherwise could have earned. So it's really important that you work with your cardholders earlier rather than later to get those delinquencies paid off. Make sure they're doing things like split disbursement. Make sure they're using the card in an authorized manner only, and things like that you do on a daily basis. For CBA delinquencies, as you can see there, it's always been more of a challenge, more of a roller coaster, if you will. We've been challenged, specifically the Marine Corps and some of the independent agencies have been especially challenged over the last year or so as they migrated to the DAI ERP, and they had some challenges to work through that made paying off their invoices harder than they otherwise would be. You can see in some cases the Marine Corps, when that was really peaked, they had almost a 50% delinquency rate, and the IAs at the same time. So we're hearing that most of those migration issues are behind us, and we're actually starting to see the results of that in the more recent metrics. But it was a tough year for CBA delinquencies, especially for those organizations that were migrating over to the DAI ERP. And in the same manner with the IBAs, The more you can attack, for lack of a better word, those in the early time frame, the easier it is to stay on top of them and make sure they don't drag out, if you will, over that longer time period. So a couple other things that we track is the percentage of declined transactions. And there's a mix, if you will, as you can see there in the notes. There's a mix of good declines. For example, someone's trying to use their card at an unauthorized location and therefore it declines. That's a good decline. Or there are bad declines when someone's trying to use their card in an authorized manner and it's not activated, or there's insufficient credit, or whatever the case may be. So it's really important that you stay on top of your declined transaction reports, trying to be more proactive than waiting for a cardholder, for example, to call in and say that they're having a problem with your card. If you can track those more often, and activate the card or adjust their credit limit as necessary, you can reduce the frustrations that occur, of course, from a cardholder perspective when they're trying to use their card, but they're unable to. So we do track those. They're roughly around that 10% average on a consistent basis. And like I said, the main thing is trying to separate, if you will, the good declines from the bad declines, and trying to reduce those bad declines. And then not listed on the screen here, but we also track the rate of split disbursements. And we set a pretty high threshold of 90%, and most of the time we make that. And again, that's measured by the percentage of payments that Citibank receives, and the percentage of those overall payments made via split disbursement. One of the reasons we track that is kind of circles back to the unauthorized use perspective. If the cardholders are using their cards in an authorized manner, and therefore being reimbursed appropriately and using split disbursement, that should drive those split disbursement rates up. So when we start to see lower levels of split disbursement, it's an indicator that people are out of policy in terms of potentially using the card in an unauthorized manner, and therefore not being reimbursed, or not using the mandatory split disbursement when they do process their vouchers. So that's one thing we want to try to make sure we stay on top of. A couple of, so we also work with the CPMs and with Citibank to develop some strategic goals for the program. We used to call them annual goals, but we modified that recently to call them strategic goals. Some of them, just like any strategy, it takes place and sometimes over longer periods of time. But some of the things we're continue to work on, as you know, we still have some open issues related to combination of the city manager relaunch when we move to SP3, or the migration, if you will, the back end at Citibank between the TS1 back end and the TS2 back end. So we've been tracking, almost since we transitioned to SmartPay 3, we've been tracking reported issues largely related to those one or two of those things. And we there's about a dozen or so issues that remain open among the roughly 150 or so that were reported over the last several years. We meet with your CPMs and with Citibank, and also with GSA on a monthly basis to review the status of those and try to make sure we get those closed out as soon as possible. Ultimately comes down to, of course, improving, especially for the APCs, your experience when you log into City Manager, making sure everything's working fine and you're provided the information that you need to manage your program. But it also improves the cardholder experience for those cardholders that are using the City Manager process as well. One of the things we hope to implement here in the not too distant future is something called roles-based management. And that's a way to improve the assignment of entitlements to your non-card holders. So for example, we have a read-only capability. Currently today, when you set up a new read-only user, you have to assign all the entitlements and then delete the ones that are not specific to ROA. This capability will allow you to assign a role to a non-cardholder user, and then based on the role you assign, the appropriate entitlements are automatically assigned to that user. Citibank recently completed a pilot of this with one of their civilian agencies, so we hope to be able to roll it out to DoD in fairly short order. I pretty much already touched on the other things on the slide here with regard to virtual accounts and mobile payments and merchant blocking level. But one of the other things we're always looking to do is expand the use of IntelliLink. And I encourage you to attend some of the IntelliLink sessions that are part of the forum this year as well. For those that don't know, IntelliLink is a kind of a self-learning tool to help you manage potential unauthorized transactions. So it automatically identifies transactions as questionable, if you will, and then provides an inherent and automated capability for you to determine whether or not that transaction was authorized and legitimate, or if it was unauthorized. And then it assigns a grade, if you will, to those transactions, and essentially self-learns based on the usage. So the more we use it, the more of those self-learning capabilities it can provide to help you focus more on those questionable transactions instead of doing, for example, like a total 10 or 25% review of all your transactions. So it's a really effective tool that is mandated at certain APC levels, but we believe it's a great tool for any APC level. And the last slide here is just the references. I'm hoping that you're all familiar with the DTMO website, especially the new and improved version that was launched over the last year or so. But that's where you can find all the references to help you manage your program on a day-to-day basis. The GTC regulations I think the last update was roughly a year ago this time. We try to review that with your CPMs and make whatever updates might need to be made on an annual basis. So we should be doing that here shortly. For those of you familiar with that document, you know it can be fairly thick. I think it's about 50 pages or so. So what we tried to do and have done is create kind of a crib notes version, if you will, specific to the cardholder, with the cardholder reference GTC regulations. And then we have a more detailed APC guide that kind of beyond the regulations gets into some of the city manager activities as well. I mentioned tracks earlier. So we have several training resources out there. The one you're probably most familiar with is the Travel Card 101 WBT, which, as you know, is mandatory for new card holders. Training for existing card holders is required every 3 years, and while it's not mandatory for them to reuse the Travel Card 101, again, it's a great resource even for those that require refresher training, if you will. There are some courses out there for your commanders and supervisors, if you're not familiar with, to help them disposition, if you will, reports of travel card misuse. Kind of helps walk them through the process of any action that they might want to do administratively to their card holders that might be reported. And we have several modules, if you will, for ABC training out on the TRACS website as well. I assume, but if not, you're all familiar with the Citibank Learning Center, and if you're not, there are other courses available throughout the forum on that regard as well. But that serves as a one-stop shop and you access it through City Manager. But it's a one-stop shop for City Manager user guides. You can do registration for training events through that as well, or training courses, if you will. And you can also register if you're not familiar with, during the peak periods, if you will, of COVID. We pretty much had to pull the on-site training, but on-site training is back in place now. So if you have at least 20 APCs at a particular location that you want to do kind of like a mass classroom training, Citibank once again offers that capability, and you can register for those on-site events through the Citibank Learning Center as well. And so that is the end of the presentation. We'll shortly go live, if you will, to answer any questions you might submit through the chat. I have a couple of moderators to help me with that, and we'll try to get through as many of your questions as we can in the time that remains. So thank you very much.